You step onto the windswept headland just as the sun slips behind the abbey ruins, and Commander Adam Dalglish's voice carries across the salt air. Where silence leans on stone and bone, he recites, each syllable measured. I wait for truth to speak. The small circle of poets hushes, as though the sea itself is holding its breath. You can almost taste the anticipation. A week of writing, reflection, and mild, civilized rivalry. What could possibly go wrong in a place dedicated to words? The answer arrives sooner than you expect. On the final evening, while you're considering whether to applaud or analyze the latest sonnet, celebrated poet Sylvia Arkwright lifts a crystal glass, smiles at her audience, and collapses before the echo of her last stanza fades. The room erupts, chairs scrape, voices rise, and Dalgliesh, no longer merely a guest with a pen, shifts into the quiet authority of a detective. You feel the retreat tip from lyrical to lethal in a heartbeat. Why poison at a poetry reading? That question coils in your mind as Dalgliesh guides the group to the old library. Even as shock clings to the walls, he keeps his tone gentle, conversational, coaxing rather than commanding. You notice how he invites each poet to talk about the day's workshop, asking what seemed innocuous only hours ago. It's comforting, almost, to hear him speak of iambic stresses and metaphor, but beneath the cadence lies a sharper rhythm. He is mapping motive. You begin to see the group not as fellow writers, but as potential suspects painted in verse. There's Marcus Finch, the avant-garde critic, who once skewered Sylvia's collection and never apologized. During workshop critiques, he flicked his pen like a dagger, slicing through weaker lines. Then there's Irene Holloway, the retiring academic, whose reputation Sylvia eclipsed, leaving tenure committees dazzled by brilliance that wasn't Irene's. You recall how Irene's voice trembled when Sylvia dismissed her villanelle as derivative. Can wounded pride ferment into murder? Dalgliesh doesn't accuse. He invites. He asks each poet to reread the piece Sylvia had just critiqued. You listen, fascinated, as their voices fill the library with phrases of envy, longing, and love. Every reading becomes a confession in code. Marcus snarls through consonants, planting verbal thorns. Irene keeps her diction precise, but her eyes brim with something darker. Even quiet Oliver Trent, Sylvia's protégé, falters on the word forever, as if the promise itself is poisonous. You can't help asking yourself, which line hides the lethal intent? Forensic officers arrive, footsteps muffled on ancient tiles, yet Dalgliesh remains central, translating the laboratory of language into the language of laboratories. He notes that Sylvia's glass smelled faintly of almonds, cyanide's whispered signature. He muses aloud about dosage and dissolution, comparing the dispersal of poison to enjambment in free verse. You smile despite the chill, because the analogy is compelling, but the reality is grim. One sip, one line break, one heart stopped. The next morning the group gathers under grey light. Guilt drifts among them like mist, clinging to jackets and metaphors alike. Dalgliesh proposes a simple exercise. Each poet must write a short poem capturing the previous day. You wonder, is this therapy or tactic? As pens scratch, he moves between desks, reading yet not reacting. Later, over weak coffee, he shares what he's gleaned. Marcus's poem fixates on revenge served cold. Irene circles inevitability. Oliver's mourns betrayal of trust. Dalgliesh speaks softly, but every observation lands like a pebble in still water, sending ripples of unease. You feel the retreat closing in, the abbey walls thick with centuries of unsolved prayers. Why is guilt easier to hide than rhythm? Dalgliesh comments on fingerprints lifted from the vial found in Sylvia's satchel. Only hers and one other set, prints that match the antique fountain pen Irene proudly displayed at dinner. Yet he asked the room, almost casually, "What is authorship, if not a fingerprint of the mind?" The poets shift in their chairs. You do too. Could a pen be both instrument of art and agent of death? Night falls again, and Dalgliesh invites everyone to the chapel for a final reading, a vigil, he calls it. Candles flicker, shadows dance along stone columns, and the sea moans outside like a forgotten chorus. Dalgliesh steps forward with a fresh sheet of paper. His voice is low, resonant, carrying every ear toward confession. "Lines for a poison poet," he begins, then pauses. You lean in. He continues. "One bitter note to stain the throat, one rival veiled as friend, one pen that bled a hidden oath, now sings the fatal end." The stanza hangs, spare and electric. He turns to Irene, whose lips part but produce no sound. Dalgliesh explains gently that the forensic ink analysis showed traces of cyanide on the nib of her beloved pen. When Irene had borrowed Sylvia's glass during the reading, an innocent gesture, or so it seemed, the residue dissolved, invisible until the toast sealed fate. Dalgliesh cites her poem about inevitability, her years of overlooked scholarship, her simmering sense of being overwritten. You watch as tears carve silent tracks down her cheeks. There is no outburst, only the hollow echo of a dream poisoned by resentment. The retreat ends not with applause, but with an ambulance's muted siren and the soft rustle of notebooks closing. You step outside, breathing salted air that suddenly tastes of relief and regret. Dalgliesh joins you, hands clasped behind his back, gaze fixed on the horizon. He speaks almost to the wind. Poetry seeks truth, but sometimes it buries it deeper. Then he turns to you. What will you write about this week? The question roots in your chest. You realize the story isn't only his to tell. It's yours to carry forward, line by careful line. As you pack your suitcase, you replay the week's verses in your mind. Rivalry sharpened like quills, secrets beating beneath meter, justice arriving in a single pared down stanza. You can't help asking one last question. Will you remember the tragedy or the lesson that followed? The answer, like any good poem, is yours to finish. Here's what lingers as you leave the Abbey Road behind. Words hold power sharper than steel. Envy can ferment in quiet corners, and truth, however veiled, waits for a voice brave enough to speak it. Carry those lines with you. Let them echo when your own pages feel empty. And never forget that every poem, like every life, hides a next line waiting to be written.